Every now and again, whilst making videos for theravenseye, you come across a story where the actions of some of those involved almost beg a belief. Sometimes it's selfless heroism, when someone puts their own life at risk to save a complete stranger. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes a tragedy can bring out the absolute worst in human nature. It was Sunday, August the 1st, 2004, a warm, sunny day in the Paraguayan capital Asunción, and just as in towns and cities all over the world, many people were out to do a bit of leisurely shopping and maybe grab a bit of Sunday lunch before it was back to work on Monday. And if you wanted to kill two birds with one stone, to do some shopping and have a nice lunch out at the same time, where better than the Ycua Bolaños hypermarket and food court? Back in 2004, the Ycua Bolaños was one of the more modern supermarkets in Asunción. Sprawling some 8,000 square metres over 2 floors, it had a food court which could seat over 300, and capacity in the supermarket section for well over 1,200 shoppers. On that fateful Sunday, it was fairly busy with around 1,000 people inside, working, shopping and eating. Being a Sunday, the food court would be doing brisk trade, so the barbecues had been fired up that morning in anticipation of the busy lunchtime period. But above the kitchen, there was a hidden and deadly problem. One of the main chimneys had been designed with a 90-degree bend in it. This made cleaning the flue time-consuming and difficult, as somebody had to go up inside to reach the inside of the bend where greasy deposits would form. Now, due to a lack of regular cleaning, a large amount of sooty grease and ash had been allowed to build up in that difficult-to-reach part of the chimney. As employees beavered away on the hot grills below, up above a small fire had started in the greasy chimney, a fire which, although burning slowly, was spreading. As this fire grew stronger, it ate through the thin metal wall of the upper chimney and allowed smoke and flammable fumes out into the space between the outer roof and the inner suspended ceiling. This build-up of smoke and flammable gas continued for a couple of hours. Hidden and unnoticed, it spread throughout the roof space of the entire supermarket. The critical moment came at 11:20 a.m. The fire in the chimney finally burned through the thin metal plate separating the kitchen area from the roof space, and the smouldering fire suddenly found a fresh source of oxygen and exploded. And I mean, it literally exploded. Eyewitnesses remember a huge fireball which blew out all the glass panels around the food court area. This fireball ripped through the food court seating part, incinerating everyone in that area instantly. And a wave of fire now rolled out from the shattered mezzanine court, running along the broad open supermarket ceiling. All those gases which had built up in the roof space ignited, and within seconds the whole of the massive supermarket ceiling was ablaze, and flammable roof tiles began to fall down onto the terrified and panicked shoppers, who ran screaming for the nearest exit. Among those fleeing was 7-year-old Tatiana Gabaglio, who later recounted her story. There was a huge explosion from the restaurant and the roof started burning. People were running in all directions. As we were running, I fell over near the doors that led out to the car park, and my friend fell over too. That's when I heard people shouting, "Open the doors, open the doors, we don't want to die." And that's when all hell broke loose. In a move of such monstrosity that it almost defies belief, the supermarket owner, Juan Paiva, along with his son Victor, had ordered the security guards on duty to close the security barriers and to lock the emergency exits in order to prevent customers from leaving the store without paying. Eyewitnesses report seeing at least one security guard firing his pistol into the air to keep the panicking crowds back, as the doors were locked and the security barriers came down. So these two men had just locked over 900 men, women and children inside a burning supermarket. Why? Because they were worried about losing a few quid. As smoke began pouring from the building and flames were seen shooting from the roof, passers-by, hearing the frantic cries of those trapped inside, began breaking windows, tearing down fences and trying to break holes in the walls, just to try and get some people out. Firefighters and rescue services were quickly on scene, but with no means of access into the building, they too were forced to tear down fences and gates and to smash glass block panels and break through walls if they were to have any chance of saving the trapped customers. As the injured and the dead were pulled from the building, the fire continued to rage, burning until well after dark. Crowds of people jammed the streets around the supermarket, many looking for missing family members, hoping against hope that brothers, sisters, sons, daughters were not among the ones still trapped inside the raging inferno. Eventually the fire was extinguished, but by the next day it became clear to see that there was no part of the giant supermarket that had escaped the flames. A large section of the roof had collapsed, and one of the floors had also collapsed, caving into the parking area below. Any open spaces nearby were being used as temporary morgues, but the bodies just kept piling up. The exact number of those killed varies from report to report, so there's no agreed figure. But the death toll is certainly somewhere between 374 and 424 fatalities, with over 450 injured. Many of the injured were severely burned and suffered lung damage. Whatever the actual number of fatalities is, the Ycua Bolaños supermarket fire is without doubt one of the deadliest building fires of modern times. Apart from the obvious reason of the supermarket owners locking everyone inside, there were also other factors which made this fire so deadly. There was no working sprinkler system. The fire alarms, which could have alerted staff sooner to the fire burning in the roof space, had been turned off as people found them annoying when they rang. Air vents, which would have allowed the smoke and flammable gases to escape from the roof, had not been included in the design. Polyurethane wall cladding had been used in places, and this gave off black, toxic smoke when it was set alight. But maybe none of these factors really mattered when put against the simple fact that all those trapped inside were denied any means of exit. When firemen were combing through the debris, they found that not a single fire extinguisher had been used. Such was the speed with which the fire had torn through the building. There were some seemingly miraculous escapes. For example, this ramp, which led to the food court, was, according to rescuers, about 1 metre deep with bodies. While they were clearing them, they found one man alive, buried underneath the pile. Those above him had burned, shielding him from the heat. But it's no happy ending. The man's wife had been one of the ones above him, and she'd perished in the inferno. In a case like this, it's almost impossible to gauge the psychological damage that family members and friends of the victims must have suffered, knowing that their loved ones, their children, had been locked inside on purpose, and that they need not have perished if only the doors had been open and the barriers raised. Nothing could bring the dead back, but at least the relatives might see justice done as those responsible for locking the doors went to trial. 3 men, the owner Juan Paiva, his son Victor, and security guard Daniel Areco, had been identified as the ones who had ordered the lockdown of the supermarket as the blaze began. In their first trial, which had already been tarnished with accusations of bribery and corruption, 3 judges convicted them of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. Now, this was a charge that carried a maximum sentence of just 5 years. As the judges read out their decision, anger erupted in the courtroom. Chairs were thrown at the judges and at the defendants. And as word spread that the defendants were being let off lightly, fierce rioting broke out in the city. Forced into a second trial by the sheer overwhelming anger of the general public, the judges this time increased the sentences. 12 years for Juan Paiva, 10 for Victor, and 5 for security guard Daniel Areco. But to the surprise of no one, both Paivas were released from prison halfway through their sentences on account of their good behaviour. As a side note, Victor Paiva died in 2020 due to complications from diabetes and COVID-19. Tatiana Gabaglio, the 7-year-old who recounted her story, survived as she was lucky to be right next to the wall where the firefighters broke through. Although rescued, a burning ceiling tile had fallen on her leg and it burned right through to the bone. After weeks spent in hospital, doctors decided that her leg was too badly burned to save, and she faced a stark choice: lose the leg or die from infection. She chose to lose the leg, and she survived. She, like many other Paraguayans, are still bitter about the legacy of the Ycua Bolaños fire and the perceived leniency with which the justice system seemingly treated those with enough money to buy their way out of trouble. I had to forget about what happened. All these feelings of rage and frustration would hold me back. I wouldn't be able to move on, so I've chosen to forget. But justice was not served, as there is no justice in Paraguay. However, her life went on, and, with the aid of a prosthetic leg, Tatiana was able to walk again. Over the years, she's kept in touch with Edgar Bagarin, the fireman who rescued her, a relationship which ultimately inspired Tatiana herself to join the Paraguay Fire Service.